Thank you for clicking on yet another Rank the Movies video. It is still Remakeathon. We are on week 8 of Remakeathon, 8 of 10. And this week we are sticking with the theme of talking about movies based on books that had a remake. So you got the book, you've got the first movie made, and you get its remake. This week we are looking at 1986's Manhunter and 2002's Red Dragon, both based on the Thomas Harris novel of the same name, Red Dragon, which is, of course, the start of the Hannibal Lector cycle. That is the cycle that leads to Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal, and Hannibal Rising. It spawned the Hannibal TV show, all the movies based off of those said books. Overall, Silence of the Lambs is a good movie. Hannibal is a decent movie. Hannibal Rising is pretty bad. But we're going to talk about these movies in depth right now. Silence of the Lambs might actually be a later video. Down the line at some point, I might fit Silence of the Lambs into something. So, we're talking about Manhunter from 1986. They didn't like the title of Red Dragon, so they picked a different title that is not any more interesting sounding. It's really not. Luckily, both movies basically do follow the story of the book for the very broad spectrum of the idea, which is FBI profiler Will Graham is brought in to investigate a series of murders done by the Tooth Fairy. The Tooth Fairy murders a family with the phases of the moon. Therefore, I believe it's whenever there is a new moon is when he kills, and it's now about 2 weeks away from the next new moon. He has already done this twice before, and Will Graham is brought in. Will Graham is retired after being assaulted by Hannibal Lector, which is when Hannibal Lector was caught. Graham visits Hannibal Lector to try to figure out how he caught Lector, how he figured out he was the Chesapeake Ripper. Which is one of the biggest differences between these two movies, is that in Manhunter, and in the novel, it is just that he caught Hannibal Lector. He found some clues that led him to Lector, not as a suspect, just as someone to talk to about one of the victims. He then figures out, through conversation and seeing things on Lecter's desk, that he is actually the Chesapeake Ripper, and Lecter stabs him as he's calling it in. In the movie Red Dragon, however, they changed this story to allow Anthony Hopkins to actually do more, as he had only taken over the role of Hannibal Lector in Silence of the Lambs. He isn't Hannibal Lector in Manhunter. It's played by Brian Cox, who does do a very good job. Don't get me wrong. I like Brian Cox in this movie. Yeah, it's probably the end of my positive praise for Manhunter. Spoiler alert. That's probably the end of my positive praise. But Brian Cox does a great job. In Red Dragon, they retcon that idea that Will Graham actually worked with Hannibal Lecter to catch multiple serial killers before, as as a psychiatrist to help him figure out how these killers work. And Will Graham then figures out Hannibal Lecter is the Chesapeake Ripper. Hannibal Lecter assaults Will Graham. Will Graham shoots Hannibal Lecter. Thomas Harris actually preferred this and wished he had thought of it back when he wrote the book, because it made for a much more interesting dynamic between the characters, and I perfectly agree, which is why that dynamic was carried over into the Hannibal TV show, where they kind of expand on that dynamic by a lot. So that is one of the big differences between these movies, and also because Hannibal Lecter is now actually part of Will Graham's kind of process, he goes back to Hannibal Lecter more often in Red Dragon, where they ended up using dialogue a different character had, a Dr. Alan Bloom, and gave it to Anthony Hopkins to give as Hannibal Lecter with a few tweaks to make it more lectory. Whereas in Manhunter, Lecter only does what the book says he needs to do, which is the initial confrontation, and then a scene where he figures out where Will Graham lives and writes a letter to a newspaper to get the Tooth Fairy to attack Will Graham at his house. Which, in Manhunter, has no payoff. In the book and in the movie Red Dragon, it has a payoff. So that's another difference. Anyways, back to Manhunter. In the overall plot. So Will tries to figure out who the Tooth Fairy is. You also learn information about the Tooth Fairy. I'm talking more novel right now. And eventually he does. He confronts the Tooth Fairy. He figures it out that who the Tooth Fairy is and stops him before he can kill again. The Tooth Fairy is a kind of average-looking guy who was abused a lot when he was a child. He has a facial deformity that was fixed, but he still thinks he has it. And he just had a really rough upbringing. Again, the movies don't tell it, because you don't want to show that in the movie. Like, early in the movie, it's not worth putting it there because it kind of ruins the rest of it, because you just want to get into Will Graham's investigation. And if you put it where the book puts it, it will stop a movie dead in its tracks. When you're reading a book, you can just kind of keep reading, and you're still interested in being carried through. In a movie, it would stop a movie. So I understand why neither one really gives the time for the backstory of the Tooth Fairy. My biggest problem with Manhunter is the simple fact that they shove everything about that character, about the actual killer, to like the last third of the film is when he finally does all of his stuff, which again, he kind of pops up about halfway through the book, maybe a little earlier than that, and he's actually there doing stuff while the investigation is happening. You're seeing his reaction to what's being reported. You're seeing his dealing with the fact that he is fighting with this inner demon inside of him, which believes it is the beast from the painting, the Great Red Dragon and the woman clothed in the sun. I believe that's the correct painting. I know the movies and the TV show and the book are very unsure, because the painter did two paintings with basically the same name, and the only difference is it's the front of the dragon or the back of the dragon, and the movie just kind of pick whichever one they want. Anyways, in Manhunter, it comes in so late, and the actor who plays the Tooth Fairy is Tom Noonan, who's a pretty good actor. It's hard not. He's in The Last Action Hero. He's in a bunch of different things. He's not a bad actor, but he's not that threatening. Like, Ray Fiennes plays him in Red Dragon, and that is just amazing. Ray Fiennes does a great performance in that movie. Again, the ending of the movie is Will Graham finds the Tooth Fairy's house, stops him from murdering the love interest that has barely been built up through the movie, because again, they gave the last third of the film instead of any more time to actually give a damn about this blind woman who the Tooth Fairy is falling in love with, but at the same time feels he needs to kill because it's what the dragon wants. Not really building that up. And then it just kind of ends. The Tooth Fairy is shot, the Tooth Fairy is defeated, and we all go home. We're not happy, but we get to go home. Which is the best part of this movie, is at the end of it, you don't have to watch it anymore. I'm not a fan of the 1986 version. I've tried to watch it multiple times. I have gotten from start to finish through it once. I've fallen asleep to this movie, and I'm a person who watches a lot of movies. So a movie that on its first viewing puts me to sleep, that's got to take points off of that movie. Because that's saying something. That it puts me to sleep off of one viewing. Moving over to the 2002 version of Red Dragon, that's actually my favorite Anthony Hopkins led Hannibal Lector film. As much as I like Silence of the Lambs, and it's a really good movie, Red Dragon is such a better movie. It is so much better. I love this movie. I love what Brett Ratner did with it. Edward Norton as our Will Graham character. I've already mentioned Ray Fiennes. Harvey Keitel plays Will Graham's boss, Jack Crawford. It is a great cast, and they're doing a great job. Anthony Hopkins is fantastic in this movie. This is my favorite interpretation of the book, and I really like the book, because Red Dragon is also my favorite book in the Hannibal Lector series as well. So it goes to show that a strong representation on film is the one I like. I think Manhunter isn't a strong representation of the novel, and therefore that's why I don't like it, because I really like the novel. It is such a good novel. I think Red Dragon really captures that and shows you a much better story. Although they both tell the same story I think Red Dragon does it in a better way. I think they get to introducing the Tooth Fairy earlier in the story, so you actually care, and he gets time to develop, and you get time to see his struggle as he's doing things and who he is. And they try to bring in the backstory very quickly, just so they can have it there. So give the points to Red Dragon. It is such a good movie. Definitely check it out. Manhunter, don't. I own a copy of it because it came in a 3-pack with Silence of the Lambs and Hannibal. Because this is the one they package with that trilogy. It is what it is. So, alright. So that's my thoughts on Red Dragon and Manhunter, or that is the order I rank those movies, just in case anyone didn't get it from the way I talked. Alright, we are continuing on with Remakeathon next week as we move into the 90s. That's right, we got 2 weeks, 2 movies released in 1990 that have both been remade in the last 30 years. Both less than 30 years on both, just to be perfectly clear. So next week we are talking about the Arnold Schwarzenegger classic Total Recall and the Colin Farrell remake of the same name. It should be a good time. Alright, hit the subscribe button to make sure you see that content. Comment down below if Manhunter is your favorite movie ever, and I just shat all over it. And don't forget to hit that like button, so I know this is worth continuing doing. Alright, until next time, I'll see you later.